A quick one from the shed. And Charlie, you know as well as I do that I am obsessed at the moment with matters of existence, reality, truth, living, and all that sort of stuff. It just amuses me. I don't care. But truth. All right, now I like to amuse myself with the idea that I've got a fairly good handle on the fact, if it is a fact, that multiple truths can coexist. All right. I like to think that I've got a good handle on that, but I get caught out. You can be speaking a truth, I have discovered, from personal experience, and you may well, in another forum, say, "Oh, we're all truths, are from one perspective or another, and there's probably another truth out there, to match up with your truth that you're speaking just now." But sometimes I'm speaking a truth, and I think it's a universal truth, a truth that's out there rather than just in my head, and I catch myself out. All right, another one, because I've had these before. This is a good one. I was listening to a politician. I've forgotten who it is. I get the feeling it was Lydia Thorpe, who has just resigned for having liaisons with Dustin Martin's uncle, who's a bikie, who was at least, with the rebels. Now here's a funny thing. You wouldn't believe this, but I didn't intend to say this. I was on the back of a motorbike, a Harley Davidson, getting driven around by a rebel's bikie once. He gave me a lift. Oh, he's a mate. He's still a mate, a total mate. My brothers know him well. MG. Anyway, he was one of the rebels, and I think Anyway, I jumped on his motorbike. He wanted to, he was taking me down to Moonee Ponds, just cruising around on his Harley. I got on his bike behind him. He's got his patch. He's got his whole bit. And there was, I didn't feel that safe. And I've never been on the back of a motorbike getting a dink from someone else. But I gave him a great big hug. I put my arms around him. I was only young. And he said, "Damien, we don't do that." I'm hanging on, I said to him. And he said, no, there's little handles, just hang on, just next to your seat, just hang on there. I didn't like that at all. I wanted to give him I gave him a beautiful big cuddle. He couldn't take off like that. He didn't want to be driving down the road with me hugging him like a girl. Anyway, Lydia Thorpe, she was... I imagine she was on the back of the bike too, and I bet you she was allowed to give her man a hug. I wasn't allowed to give my man a hug. I'm a bit put out by that. Anyway, Lydia Thorpe, she was on the radio. It was either her or someone else. She's in the news at the moment, so maybe I'm conflating one comment I heard on the radio with one issue that's happening on the radio at the moment. She's been sacked for having liaisons, with this bikie, because she was also on a committee, Senate committee, that was, looking into bikie crime and crime in general. Wonder why she got sacked. All right. Now, anyway, she said, or someone else said, I don't know why Indigenous Australians, align themselves with African Americans so much, the whole Black Lives Matter thing, blah, blah, blah. They've got nothing in common with those guys. They've got something in common with the Native Americans, if anything. They're not similar to, African Americans. African Americans were brought over there from slaves, you know what I mean? They weren't even indigenous to the USA and all that sort of stuff, and the Caribbean and all that sort of thing. You know, the Native Americans were indigenous to over there, and Aboriginal Australians were indigenous to here, and both got conquered. So why are they thinking they are like African Americans and doing the whole Black Lives Matter thing? Why aren't they just aligning themselves with Native Americans? And I must admit, I've run that argument before myself. You know, I was bemused and amused at one stage. And I was like, how come Indigenous Australians, you know, feel such a kinship with African Americans here, you know, doing all the rap and all that sort of stuff, you know, Black Lives Matter and all that sort of stuff. How come? You know, when their experience is very similar to the experience of Native Americans. You know, that's what I've made that comment. So, you know, Lydia and me, you know, made the same comment. And as I was making that comment ages ago, you know, that, you know, objecting to the stupidity of Indigenous Australians in aligning themselves with African Americans, I know that in my head I thought I had this nailed, you know. And I suspect Lydia Thorpe, or whoever it was, did too. You know, because it's a good argument, you know. But, I was just thinking today, you know, I was having a chat with someone, and I said, oh, wait a minute. I pulled myself up. And I said, oh, wait a minute. I was speaking from a political standpoint. You know, this was a political truth, a truth from a political perspective. I, myself, forgot that there might be other perspectives. You know, so it's true what Lydia and me said. Indigenous Australians do have a hell of a lot more in common with Native Americans than they do with African Americans. That is true. But we thought that was the end of it. I know I did. I'm sure she did too. We forgot to add, from a political perspective, is it and was it true from, let's say, a social perspective or even a psychological perspective? Maybe Indigenous Australians have got a lot more in common with African Americans than they have with Native Americans in terms of just the plain regard with which colonial Americans and colonial Australians held them. You know, is that true? So now, it's not to say that what Lydia and I said was wrong, but I'm sure neither of us realised, I can't speak for her. Yeah, I can, sort of. I reckon I'm right. Sometimes, even if you're aware that there are multiple truths out there, you can catch yourself out. And I think I did. So, you know, prior to this little chat here, I would have, you know, died on a hill for that one, that truth, because it's a truth, you know. Indigenous Australians have got a hell of a lot more in common with Native Americans than they have with African Americans. So what the hell are they doing identifying with African Americans with that whole bloody bullshit of Black Lives Matter? I believe in Black Lives Matter, by the way. That's, you know, I've covered that in other episodes. All right, I can be a redneck here for jokes. All right. And that is all true. But it's not the only truth, and the other truth is just as valid, and that's a really tricky thing that keeps creeping up on you. Even if you're aware of it, you forget. You forget. You know, like when you're dead, you know, and you're in the afterlife, you know. I reckon you're up there in the afterlife, and you're sitting there and you're having a chat to someone and talking about this and talking about how's those bombers and all that sort of stuff, and then suddenly you go, oh, wait a minute, I just remembered we're dead. And that'd be kind of funny.